welcome all. First thing I was going to say is we've rejigged, or Fiona has suggested we've rejigged the agenda to allow external audit to come early and Homes England to do their spots early, so you guys can get your life back and get home in one piece.
Thank you.
So we'll be jumping around with the page numbers a bit, but we've actually got quite a heavy agenda, so quite a few things to get through. I'm sure we'll get there in good time. So if I just go start with apologies for absence. I had a message from Paul this morning. He's with his son at his prospective university looking around, so he couldn't get back from that in time. And I believe Trudy, Councillor Burney has still signed off sick, so there's 4 of us represented. Are there any declarations of interest that anybody would like to make? No? If we look at them, has everybody looked at the minutes of the previous meeting? Everybody content with them? They're video minutes these days. The actions, I've got a summary here. We had 5 actions. 2 for M. Kirk to provide some information on the digital platform. That appears to be provided. M. Kirk to provide information on the findings of the health and safety review. Is everybody content with that action? Trudy to add a review of procurement service to the work programme for September as requested by Nigel Howcutt. Looks like that one's been cleared off. Nigel to circulate recent cabinet reports relating to procurement review to the committee. They've been circulated. And I asked for an update on the appointment of an independent member. We have a timeline, which is good, April, May, and hopefully an extra face in July. So I'd say the actions are closed off. We don't appear to have any public participation. So we'll move to the first agenda item, which is Homes England, which I believe is page 41. Any questions?
Chair, I think David will give a brief overview.
Oh, yeah, sorry.
Good evening, Chair, thank you. Just to introduce myself, I'm David Barrett, one of the Assistant Directors in Housing. And so tonight I'm bringing you a Homes England Compliance Audit Report.
Yeah.
And the purpose is really that we're required to share the content of that with you for you to acknowledge, and that includes any of the recommendations. So over the last 2 years, we have accessed over £20 million worth of funding for the council to support the programme of building new homes, and we've accessed that on a project by project basis, which is set out in your report. It's the highest amount in any local authority in the UK. So consequently, we were audited. That audit started in August 2023. You've got a bit of a timeline of how that audit was run, which included appointing independent auditors, and the outcome from Homes England is they give a red, amber or green status. Our report is showing green, which is a good news story. There was one minor breach, which the details are contained within the report, which if required I could take you through, but it's here for your acknowledgement, and happy to take any questions.
Just got to say, a great report, credit to you and the folks that work with you, and clearly they've got to find something, the auditors, because they'd be probably hammered if they weren't finding a little thing there. So very happy with it and no issues at all. So
Thank you, Councillor Roney. It stole my thunder. So I say congratulations, Green Bill of Health, and Yeah.
So can I take it from that, the last line of paragraph 2, although it's not numbered, in outcomes, the auditor agreed to the arrangement that the team would continue to tightly monitor.
Just repeat that for me, please, Councillor.
Did the auditor agree to the recommendation or the response to the recommendation that you made?
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you. Any more questions? Oh, well done. Congratulations. If you want to take your leave.
I will do, thank you. So much.
So move on to external audit plan 24-25. Over to Chris.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for moving me up the agenda. I suspect it probably would follow better following the Grant Thornton report, but nevertheless.
Can I just for committees of references, page 130 on your report pack. We are jumping around a little bit.
Oh, sorry about that. Yeah. So the report is the external audit plan and strategy draft for this year. Draft because we are close to concluding our planning and risk assessment, but not yet fully completed. And we would also in the final plan, if you like, would also include our risk assessment work around the value for money, which is in train, and we've kind of been holding off until the Grant Thornton report takes place, but we have arranged with officers to attend alongside Grant Thornton a lot of the meetings they've had in connection with the value for money work in order to, wherever possible, reduce duplication of effort on the part of officers. So we will provide a revised or an updated version of this report to the next audit committee, but this is certainly from the perspective of the financial statements, statement of accounts, and leaving aside the value for money is pretty much where I expect us to land regarding materiality, significant risks, and our response to those significant risks. I won't take each page as I won't turn the pages on it, you'll be pleased to know, and I will take the overall report as read, but I'll just point out a few key points really. So if I start with page 3 of our report, which is 134 of the pack, that just sets out our materiality considerations. There are 3 levels of materiality, the top line being kind of our view of what users of the accounts would consider to be material. The second line, the 2.6 million, being the level to which we audit, and we actually conduct our audit procedures around that materiality level. That's to address a number of things, one of which is aggregation risk. In other words, the risk that there are multiple smaller misstatements within the accounts that could add up to a material sum. So that is a normal process, and it will reflect what you'll have seen that through your reporting from Grant Thornton in the past. And then finally, we have our misstatement reporting threshold of £200,000, which is effectively our triviality level, below which we would consider a matter to be trivial and above which we would report to those charged with governance through our final ISO 260 report at the end of the process. I'll then move to page 5, which is page 136 of the pack, which sets out our view at the moment of the significant risks. This is not to say that we believe that there will be a misstatement within those particular balances or linked to those particular risks, but these are the areas that present the highest likelihood of a material misstatement within the accounts. I won't go through each of those pages individually, but I'll just touch on them briefly. So the first 2 in relation to valuation of operational land and buildings and valuation of investment properties are effectively both in there because they're highly material balances and they are subject to subjective estimate. They have estimation uncertainty within them, and I'm sure that's consistent with what you've heard previously. The third one around management override of controls is a standard significant risk that auditing standards require us to report to those charged with governance on pretty much every audit. And if you pick up an audit plan in another sector, in a private sector context, you will see that risk appear because it's almost inherent in the process that you would address that. The fourth one is around post-retirement benefit obligations, in other words, the local government pension scheme obligations. And again, that's based on the level of subjectivity and estimation uncertainty inherent within that balance. And then finally, we have an assumed risk within this sector around expenditure recognition, and that's really about the management of the expenditure position in any given year in order to achieve a balanced outcome and not drawing upon reserves. That isn't a particular risk here over and above any other authority, but again, is a pretty standard risk you'll see in the sector in local government. I'll then touch on page 11, which is 142 of the pack, and that's just to say that alongside that management override of controls, there is also an assumed risk, a presumed risk within auditing standards around revenue recognition. But as we've set out on page 11 of our report, we've looked through the various sources of revenue that the authority has and are comfortable that there are insufficient risk within the recognition of those revenue streams to warrant us recognising a significant risk, and therefore we rebut that presumed risk. We do reserve the right to continue to monitor that and change our mind as we go through the audit process, but that's where we're likely to land on that. And then just one other bit that I would mention is around independence. Appendix 4, which is page 18 of the report. It's very important that I just sort of for the minutes kind of explain to you that we've considered the non-audit work that we're likely to undertake in respect of this financial year, and we don't consider them to be significant versus our audit fee, and we're comfortable that based on inquiries and the work we've done, we are independent of the authority, and there are no threats to our independence as the external auditor. So I just wanted to make that point. I think that was all I was going to highlight, but I'm happy to take any questions.
Just a quick one that's probably dear to my heart about our commercial assets, you know, the whole neighbourhood shopping centres. What is your view on the valuation of them? Because clearly we are, it's a sort of investment for us, but we would never sell them, but we do get quite a good income stream, although there are quite about 25% of the tenants are on payment plans, and we have to balance our social aspect with getting cash in, you know, we don't want empty shops, and there's clearly some shops who do struggle, but we are about 96% full. So how do you take on sort of the value them on the balance sheet, or review? Although it doesn't matter really to us, the balance sheet, because we're not borrowing against our balance sheet.
No, but it's important from an accuracy of the accounts point of view. Well, I mean, clearly they're subject to an external valuation. Wilkes and is that right? Yeah. So we would approach that in much the same way as we would do for any entity in terms of assessing the work that they've done and whether they've made appropriate assumptions. And part of that would be around occupancy level of. We would expect that the way that those properties are valued has due regard to the commercial realities of that particular property. So that's very much our focus, is whether they're providing an accurate valuation.
Just to follow on from what Chris has said, we commission Wilkes to undertake those valuations. As Chris has said, they'll take a number of factors into consideration when coming up with those valuations, which are communicated to us at the time the information is provided to us. We as officers will challenge that if we feel there's anything that needs to be challenged on that front, and then obviously Chris and his team will come in and do their own assessment as part of the external audit review. So it's quite a thorough process that we go through in order to determine those asset valuations.
So always my view of our neighbourhood shops is, although they're secondary shopping retail areas, I think an investor would bite our hand off to buy them with the level of occupancy and the diversity of the type of shops there. So compared to a lot of other parades that you see, there are investment properties on the commercial side. So yeah.
So they will value based on the best available use for those equally. So they will have due regard to that as well. And our job is to make sure that those assumptions are reasonable.
Yes, okay, thank you.
Some years ago, we rather fell foul, and I'm going back a good number of years now, of valuations by valuers. And to some extent, it felt as though it was subjective, that you can go to one valuer and he will, or she will give you one valuation for the properties. You'll go to another one and you'll get a different valuation. And the margin of difference can be not insignificant. How comfortable are you with the valuation that we're looking at here in terms of its substance?
So this, I suppose there's two parts to that. The first part, in terms of that inherent essential necessity, you're absolutely right. You would assume there are certain metrics and indices that you would expect any competent valuation firm to have due regard to, but I do take your point that different firms might come up with different values, and that's very much part of the reason why it's a significant risk for us in terms of the audit, because it's very important that those are based on solid assumptions. As to your second point, I'm not in a position to say at this point in time, because we've not got into the kind of the 24-year end accounts to be able to appraise the valuation at this stage.
Yeah, just a comment that the more things one thing to be concerned about is just the cash flow, making sure our rents are coming in rather than what everything's valued at, because I say we're not going to sell it, but that's a major income stream for the council. So that's it.
So I mean, I suppose on that point, there is some element of straying into the VFM scope of work as well. But yeah, absolutely, you know, effective use of resources is a very important part of that.
Thank you very much.
Got another question. My eye is always drawn to the page with the audit fee.
Yeah.
And I'm curious to know why the statutory audit fee for 23-24 is almost 100% more than it was for 22-23.
Yeah. Well, I'll start by saying that the figure that we've put in for the prior year is taken from the draft account, so I can't say for sure, and I won't put Paul on the spot and ask him if that's the scale that's been charged for 23. But either way, in terms of the increase, that's simply reflective of the overall movement in the framework procurement, and it reflects that you almost can tie a very straight, try a piece of string between that and the backlogs in the sector, not necessarily here so much, but in the sector more widely, around resource constraint within the sector and the level of investment that's been required on the part of audit firms that are participating in this sector. That has therefore resulted in increased cost in the, but they're based on a framework with a risk share effectively, where everybody kind of pays an incremental increase on what they were previously paying.
Just to add on that point, so from the 1st of April, we're on a new contract arrangement with external audit, and we have KPMG. That's following work that's been done by the PSAA, so the body that oversees the appointment of auditors to assess what's an appropriate fee for local authorities to be paying external auditors for their work. Chris has also mentioned the backlog in the local authority market and for local authority audit, well documented. I think the level of fees is arguably quite a significant driver in terms of that backlog and the delivery of resources. I won't justify external audit's fee; they can do that, but that's the context really as to why there is a difference. We're under a new fee regime from the 1st of April.
Okay. And I'm aware that many people, when writing reports, put in a little catch to see if people have read it, and I didn't have to read very far to find the catch. But it's on the front page of the first paragraph on the front page, where you talk about tonight's meeting as being on the 18th of March.
Oh, well spotted. Thank you.
We just left that in for you, Councillor.
I knew you would.
Yeah, that's it. Let's go with that explanation. I'm happy to take that explanation. I do apologise.
Normally just spots a comma mistake or
Okay.
capital letter.
I have,
Make it too hard for you this time.
no, I have got a missing comma somewhere.
You certainly have.
I think it's in Philip's one.
I'm impressed.
Oh, don't pick him up, please. I've been impressed with him.
It's not it, you know, back up. It's good to keep us honest with those kind of comments, so we maintain good standard of reporting.
Right, if we go back to the running order, I mean, I must admit, we're about to go into questions to Audit Committee, regulation of investigatory powers, statement of internal controls, which I know, obviously, Phil, that's your, it's a big area.
Ripper.
But I was wondering if, to be fair, we've let you go early. Would you like to go early, Paul?
That'd be great, if that's okay.
Yeah.
Let's
go,
Yeah?
let's go with you.
Okay.
Well, you could ask Nargis if she wants to go early as well.
Well, I think Nargis is tied to Phil, aren't you?
It's all right.
No, don't worry about it.
Well, I had a nice evening yesterday.
Very kind of you.
Makes the brains for the
Yeah,
children.
Right, thank you. So, I'll take this report as read as well. There's a few things I wanted to pull out. Probably to start with, most helpful is to explain the purpose of the report. So, your auditors cover two elements that's being discussed, 23, 24 onwards. So there's the financial statements audit, and our reporting in relation to that was undertaken, I think it was either August or September of last year, when we completed our field work. And the second element of our responsibilities is around value for money. So we're required under the code of practice that we work to provide you with commentary across. So this report starts page 109.
Sorry,
109 is the first. This is the report. Yeah. So we're required to provide commentary across three criteria that are set out within the code. So that's the purpose of this report. And auditors are able to raise various recommendations depending on the severity of the issue. So in this report, we've got one improvement recommendation that's on page 118 of the pack, which management accepted, and you've got a management response. I think probably the thing I would just draw to the committee's attention is around the commentary around financial sustainability. So page 114 to 117, because this is the area that we're seeing increased focus in the sector. So we're seeing councils that are issuing section 114 notices saying that they're unable to set balanced budgets, and even councils that would traditionally be considered to be well run or to not have financial issues are forecasting that there'll be some quite significant challenges that they'll have to face in their medium-term financial strategy. So the narrative we've got in there kind of touches on that and the arrangements that you've got in place at Decorum. And I think our assessment at this point in time is that there's obviously a track record of management being able to deliver a financial position, but there are challenges going forward which have obviously been identified, hence the saving plans that are within the budgets. I think we've made a point around your reserves levels. I think to assure the committee the level that you've set, and I know that there was a benchmarking exercise undertaken, is within the kind of recommended level that are set out in the sector, but your reserve levels are not as large as others. But there are, I think, other mitigations as well. So you don't have the level of indebtedness that other councils might have. You've obviously, we've talked about investments, but the investment portfolio in terms of assets and other assets are quite strong. So there are obviously challenges, but at the moment you look quite well placed to face them. So we've not identified any kind of areas of what we would consider significant weaknesses in arrangements, which is the terminology that we are required to use in this report. So it's as positive, I guess, as a external audit report can be. There's no binary yes, no opinion on things, but you know, if there were areas of concern, we would be required to issue recommendations to that effect, and we have been increasingly doing that across the sector recently. So happy to take any questions or be made aware of any typos. It's a big report. I was very tired when I was reading it.
Excuses in early.
No, it's a reason, not an excuse.
Yeah.
I've just picked up one thing that on page 118, the management comments, and I detected that there was an element of pushback, perhaps from the management, to your judgment. How do you feel about that?
Yeah, I think that's fair. I think in terms of this reporting, this is an improvement recommendation. So, I mean, we do set out later on in the report the levels of recommendations that an auditor can raise. And this is very much one that is a nice to have, or it's a recommendation, it's an observation. I think if management had equally turned around and said, and they were relatively tactful and said, no, we don't agree with that at all, that would have been absolutely fine. I think if it was a more significant issue, in our view, and we were not happy with the response, I think we would be drawing that out to your attention. But it's not an area where there is a disagreement. I think we've made an observation. I think the response is reasonable. It's something that is to be managed, and management's view is it is being managed. So I have no concerns or quarrel in terms of the response.
Just to sorry, Councillor.
No, I was going to say, how do you feel?
Yeah, so in terms of the recommendation, I think we appreciate the observation that's been made by external audit colleagues on this one. I think there is risk inherent in any sort of savings delivery programme, particularly one that is related to transformation work. We acknowledge that. When we put forward these proposals, we do take into account likely deliverability, so there is an adjustment made for that. What I think our response really says is that as part of our planning for the medium-term financial strategy refresh, which is underway at the moment, we will make an assessment regarding the need to deliver additional headroom in our savings proposals to take into account the recommendation that's been made, and that will be developed over the next few weeks and months and be communicated to members by the usual processes.
Councillor Doris, I asked exactly the same question.
Oh, I should have been quiet and let you.
No, it's not at all. I was really impressed that great minds think alike. I know what you're going to say. But yeah, there is a response which Fiona's just explained. The MTFS is going to be looked at and adjusted. I must admit, it's something I'd like to look at the transformation programme a bit more closely, because you flag something, and it's not unreasonable. It's and they are inherently risky, and they do tend to slip sideways. So we just want to keep an eye on it. Good observation. Any more questions? No. Right, okay. I will just double check. Is Nargis, are you presenting an item on the agenda, or are you supporting?
Yes, Chair Nargis is presenting the regulatory investigatory powers.
The Ripper. So we're on to the Ripper next. Yeah. So there we go. So we're moving on to the Ripper item, which is page 7. So we're back at the top of the agenda. Would you like to introduce it?
Yeah. You've been the report that's been sent to the audit committee is the annual review of the agreement. Because there's limited RIPA activity, we don't really have a separate report as such. If you've got any questions regarding RIPA and the work that we do, then quite happy for you to take those questions. I don't propose to say any more than that, really, unless you have any questions.
I mean, I had one. I read it. It's obviously secret squirrel sort of territory, isn't it? And I just could see that some activity had occurred in Markyate, which I used to live in, by the way. And fly tipping is horrendous around there. So it's good to see the councils sending out SWAT teams, snoops, to sort of check up. I just wondered if we wanted to see some of the examples of the internal reports. Just to get a feel for what's actually produced.
I can give you a feel. So basically, RIPA is a really useful piece of legislation to actually have, because without RIPA, it's really difficult to actually catch people committing offences like fly tipping. Because what we found in our investigations is that very often RIPA fly tipping takes place at night, where visibility is very poor, and so what helps us is if these images are captured, then we can then take it on, further into prosecution by assessing the evidence. We don't necessarily have to see who's fly tipped. It's sufficient to know that the vehicle that was present when the fly tipping occurred from, is linked to a person, and by virtue of the fact that you are the owner of the vehicle, then you're actually, whether you've done it or not, it's irrelevant. You are committing that offence. Every 3 months we extend these RIPA authorisations in court, and these are done in private. And we've had really good successful outcomes from these. In fact, and I'm quite happy to sort of just go through. I don't know if you have this information to hand, but since 2022 to 2023, we've had 19 successful prosecutions, and in 2024, we've had 1 so far, but we've got plenty more in the pipeline. And
you said 20 or 20?
20, well, 19 successful prosecutions from 2022 to 2023, and then this year we've got 1, and we've got more in court, about 3 or 4 this year in court. And I mean, we about 90% of the time we get full costs from recovered from these, and these can range from £1,500 to £2,000. And we get the clear-up costs as well, which can range from £300 to £750. And fines can range from £1,000 to £1,500. So it's really quite successful, and it's just a useful piece of legislation we found.
No, that's great. Well, it's great to know that we can do this, and it's rigorously controlled. So yeah, I just as I was reading the report, it said it suggested that we, as the audit committee, should also look at some of the example reports that are produced to see what pickies you take, how you work with the police.
Yeah,
but I can see that none have been produced.
We don't actually have independent reports because it's quite limited to just these fly tipping offences. We don't really have individual reports. So the one that you have, that's been sent to the audit committee is the actual annual.
Yes,
report.
it is. Yeah. So the information you gather it's not published or
no. So even when we apply for the RIPA applications every 3 months, it's done in closed session, closed court, so that people, because it's sensitive information as to where we put the cameras, nobody's allowed to sort of know that. And in terms of the evidence that's gathered, so we have enforcement officers who will check quite regularly the SIM cards. They're not called SIM, they're called something else, but anyway, the cards. And what they would do is they will lift the images, they will do the investigations, they will contact EVLA, find out the owner of the car, the vehicle, and invite them in for a PACE interview. That's really how the investigation is conducted. And then the file is then given to legal, and then we look at whether or not an offence has been made out, and then we lay the charges.
what are the other things? Sorry,
No, please, it's fine. No,
what are the other things you look at? I noticed that there's obviously been an emphasis on fly tipping, which does require a bit of surveillance because they're crafty. What other sort of things do you?
At the moment, it's really just for fly tipping. So the cameras are directed at problematic areas. where fly tipping is a problem. So it's really fly tipping and nothing else at the moment.
Why did you mark it?
Unfortunately, it's a problematic area.
Because Market, as you said, is renowned, if you like, for fly tipping. It's, as you know, it's got a whole range of narrow roads.
Yeah.
Friendless
Lane.
Well, Friendless Lane, River Hill,
Yeah.
all of those.
Yeah.
And frequently there's a bend in the road,
Yeah.
and there's almost a pull-in, so they can actually pull in, dump, and drive off very rapidly. The other one is in Flamstead, which is the extension of River Hill, where I've seen the whole road covered in fly tipping. But of course, you as Decorum are dealing with those, but there's a number of other situations which might be dealt with by trading standards or other authorities, I guess, isn't there?
Yeah, quite possibly.
I'm not leading you down anything, because I appreciate that.
No, we're responsible for the borough, the Decorum.
Yeah.
Borough,
Yeah.
Anything outside of that is not our responsibility, the other local authorities. So who would you propose?
Yeah, because we're right, the market's right on the boundary.
Yeah, it goes right up to Luton Hoo.
Yeah.
Yep.
Probably, they're just choosing a good spot where they think, nobody's looking. Okay, thank you. Unless there's any other questions. Thank you for the update.
Chair, for the minutes, is it worth us going through the recommendations just to make sure we've got?
Oh, yes.
There, so,
Thank you very much.
okay, that's page 8.
It will be on page.
The recommendations are on page 8
Page 8
of the report.
of the pack.
So are we content that we note the report and agree that no further changes to the river policy annexed are required? Agreed?
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm agreed. Yeah, good work. Thank you.
We're to set the policy. That's what.
Trudy, I think we might need to do the same for the previous item. So this is the external auditor's interim annual report. Apologies for not mentioning it earlier. For the minutes, I think we need to go through the recommendations relating to the report that Paul Cattle just read. So those are on page 107 of the agenda of the report. Apologies for jumping around.
No, that's my fault. I missed that. Sorry.
Two recommendations, aren't there? I think.
Yep.
Yeah.
So in terms of the external auditors report, we happen to accept the interim annual report 2023 noting the recommendations within the report.
Great. Yeah, I'll be his proxy.
Thank you very much. And we're happy to note the status of the external auditors report. Yeah.
Unanimous.
Thank you.
Chris's report was just for information. You want to head off?
I'll do so in about 10 minutes, that's okay. Thank you.
Right, we're on to Phil.
Where do you want to go now?
We're on to the statement of internal controls. Actually, I know we don't rip that. Yeah, statement of internal controls assurance report 23-24. Over to Phil. This is going to take a little bit longer.
No, it's not.
No, it's not.
No, it's not. So starts on page 51 of the document. I say that merely because we're kind of jumping around a little bit. So just so you're aware of the bit that you're looking at. There are 3 reports here. All 3 are routine areas that we look at on a fairly regular basis. None of them have got a huge number of recommendations, and I would have been surprised if we had got a huge number of recommendations in respect of any of them. I'm just going to hover briefly over them, but I'm going to take the papers as read. So in respect of the key financial controls audit, you will note that the review essentially concentrated in respect of debtors. There are a couple of recommendations that are worth just talking through briefly. One of them, effectively, management has disagreed with. From my perspective, I am very much at ease with that. It was merely the combination of the two things next to one another that I was a bit concerned about. So the lack of the update in respect of the notes combined with the formal plan. Effectively, management have agreed with one and disagreed with the other, and I'm fine with that. And obviously, I'll take any questions at the end in respect of that. Moving on from that to community grants. So while there are a number of recommendations in respect of community grants, they were in respect of a period of time where there was a bit more of a staffing issue. Again, if the staffing issue hadn't been there, I'm pretty sure that we'd be looking at pretty much a clean report here. And I don't propose to dwell in respect of any of the recommendations that I've made. It's not unusual when there's a period of time when the staffing is reduced a little bit, that there are a number of recommendations, something has to give. Onto the third of the three reports, which is risk management. I guess if there was one recommendation I'd probably draw your attention to today, it would be the recommendation number 1 on that report, which is the recommendation in respect of risk appetite. I do think that's an important thing for the organisation to be focusing on going forward, particularly as you move to a more commercial strategy. It's typically something that you would consider during the course of your commercial considerations. And you would typically do that on a kind of like portfolio by portfolio basis and then segment that. And I'm sure that's something that you will do going forward. And indeed, management have responded affirmatively in respect of that and provided a helpful timeline, which coincidentally is in line pretty much with your next audit committee meeting. So yeah. I'll stop at that point and ask if anyone's got any questions in respect of any of the three reports before I briefly talk about the state of progress in respect of the plan and the follow-up as well.
Yeah. Just a quick one, Philip. You mentioned about the estates team, the debtors, and I used to look after that for quite a few years, and I do realise the pressure they're under. They have a hell of a caseload, and they're very diligent and professional people there, you know, Richard Rice and the rest of them. And it's a tough job, especially with the level of arrears, etc., that are around. Although, you know, sometimes you feel the documentation probably notes need to be made, but that's better said than done, isn't it? Than, you know, as you mentioned in your report. So
if it helps, that so working in a job very much like that was pretty much my first job upon leaving school. So so I have a lot of sympathy in respect of the difficulties in respect of the role and the difficulty in putting time aside to make notes. So yeah.
Yeah, I used to go through the overdues with them, and they had a big handle on it. They knew what they were doing. So I know it sort of looks that way, a wee bit spongy, but it's not. They're on top of this, if it's the same people I know.
Chair, if I can offer some comments. So financial services team, which is my service, we work very closely with the estates team in terms of the management of our commercial property portfolio and the associated debt. So there are monthly meetings between those teams where we go through line by line the status of each of those debts. The recommendation, I think, relates to the record keeping within the financial system. And we have agreed that what we will do is consistently ensure that that information, which is currently held off the financial system, is recorded against particular accounts in the system. We accept that. We will do that going forward. But I do want to assure committee that those debts are being monitored in a proactive and regular way, and that that information is held, and that it's held outside of the financial system. There was an associated recommendation around the use of pro formas to record any payment plans, and I have pushed back on that one because I do feel that we have that information not held in a pro forma but held within our records. From my perspective, I don't see how putting that information into pro forma adds value to the process or to our council customers. But I think there may be a slight difference of opinion between myself and the internal auditor on that one.
So not as much actually as you might think. As long as it's somewhere, I don't really care where it is. And the other thing you can't see is that this is a review where a couple of councils recently have given limited assurance. So it is important, we were talking about income streams earlier on. It's important that that diligence is maintained in respect of that, and I don't actually have overall concerns in respect of that at this organisation.
Some time ago, and things change and move on. But we have, and you've actually answered the point that I'm about to make, if you like, in that where the officers don't agree with the recommendation, we have had the opportunity to invite the officers in to make their representation, so that if you like, it's a balanced argument if in that context.
Yeah.
In terms of the timeline, it does seem that we've got to make a decision tonight on this, because the recommendation implementation is subject to the view of the audit committee. So we may need to spend a little bit of time thinking about this.
Sorry, if I can just add, as long as one of those two things is done, if there are notes consistently maintained on the system, I'm perfectly happy. You don't need to worry about the pro forma. But if there isn't notes on the system, then I think you need to go down a pro forma route.
So we've already implemented including the information on the system. That's already implemented.
I think for the record, if Trudy can just capture that, if that's okay.
And that we're in agreement.
Put it in the report.
Yeah, we're in agreement with Fiona's final landing place.
Yeah.
Are we all in agreement?
With that element.
With the response? Yeah.
I've got a couple of others, if I may.
Me too.
Oh, you go.
Really?
Yeah. Well, you're the chairman. Believe it or not, you can shut me up.
Oh, well, I wouldn't dare. I'd be capable of. Page 59. The question, are the respective portfolio holders aware of this issue around debt collection?
Yes.
Debtor days.
So, Chair, I can give some comments on that. So, in terms of debtor days, we report our performance on debtor days. So, this is the duration of time it takes our debtors on average to repay their debts. We report that as part of the Council's performance management reporting process. So, a report goes quarterly to Overview and Scrutiny Committee on that particular aspect. And there is also a specific key performance indicator around commercial property rental income as well, to give further clarity. So portfolio holders are aware of it as an issue. We provide some explanatory narrative as part of that performance reporting. It also it is also contained in any briefings that we provide to portfolio holders, which don't necessarily happen in a public forum. They happen between officers and portfolio holders in advance of those meetings. So that information is shared.
Yeah, no, it's just that when I read the comment and the response, it appeared to be a paper trail that went up through SLT, it was sort of away from, but you've answered the question.
Yeah, it goes through SLT and then from SLT onto Overview and Scrutiny. That's the trail.
That's great. And then I've only got one more. Page 66. I wholeheartedly agree with the risk appetite framework recommendation, and note that Paul, the external auditor, actually came up with the same recommendation. So it's another example of great minds thinking alike. But I got confused in terms of, I read the recommendation and it talked about guidance. And then you jumped to a risk appetite recommendation. And I was, maybe it was me being thick. I couldn't see how the two, but I think they're linked. So there's guidance going to be provided with the risk appetite framework that is area specific. I guess I just have to see it to understand it.
I think the way I'm expecting for that to be implemented is we have a risk policy and risk management guide that we produce, which comes before committee for approval. We'll incorporate those aspects into that document. So audit committee could expect to have oversight of that as well. So that's my intention in terms of addressing that particular recommendation.
Yeah, no, it's fairly chunky change to the risk.
Yes, I
matrix, isn't
think so. I think the other thing I'd add is that we are trying to update our strategic risk following the completion of the corporate plan.
Yeah.
And in line with that, we would then also update the associated guidance and incorporate the recommendations that have come through from this audit. So it's all linked together.
I should add as well, it also helps internal audit as well, in respect of the prioritisation on the recommendations that we produce, because if you've firmly established a risk appetite, then we can insert that into our system to further add impetus to whether something is a priority one.
I mean, I read that, the risk internal audit, and I thought it was a good piece of work. It's sort of honed in on the things that I was sort of, just having previous expertise.
Yeah, I mean, it's an incremental journey that the organisation's been on, but I should add as well, I mean, obviously, like you've done a lot of work over the last few years in respect of risk. You are worlds apart from where you were. So it's just that as you move to the new commercial approach, you need to do a little bit more. And that'll impact on how the audit committee does its business as well.
Yes, yeah, we've got to keep our eyes peeled. Councillor Doris.
I thought I spotted another typo, but when I read it again, actually, I don't think it is a typo, so I'm not going to go there. But on page 64, just for clarification, the management comments on item 1. This will be considered by the Quorum Council by the 1st of April. Actually,
I have, oh, sorry.
30 days in April. But never mind. It would be helpful to know who it's going to be considered by.
So I have an update from the head of service. It's it's Diane Southern, who's the assistant director for Place Communities and Enterprise. So I do have a response. I could circulate that to committee if that's helpful.
Yeah.
I'll take that as an action, Trudy.
No, it's Diane. It will get done.
Diane was on. She was on leave. I think just.
Good spot with the dates there, Councillor Doris.
Chair, you have to realise that Councillor Douris was the class SWAT.
Was it?
And it was Apple was on the teacher's desk.
Trudy to minute that. No.
The trouble is, it's recorded.
Oh, he killed me.
Yeah,
video.
But you have to remember, it was he wrote on slates and chalk. And, that was
No, I chipped the
red card.
No, I chipped the messages out of stone. But unfortunately, I do have quite a good eye for spotting things, which is frustrating sometimes, because especially if it's in a presentation and there's a letter spelled wrongly in a word, and I just focus on this and
No.
It doesn't matter if it wasn't £10 million, but it was what spelling mistake.
I've found some odd commas in £10 million before now.
Yes.
Good to have a keen eye. Right. Unless there are any other questions, I think we'll move on to the plan.
Yeah.
Is there a recommendation there?
Oh, good point.
I think Philip, you're going to comment on progress against the plan.
Yes, I am indeed.
No, sorry, I beg your pardon.
Yes, so I'm going to talk about, so page 70 of the document in front of you has got a copy of the plan. I'm satisfied it's progressing well. One thing I would highlight though is between the 5 draft reports that are there and the additional fieldwork complete and ongoing audits, some of those of which are now complete, and for example, I know budgetary control went across being issued draft yesterday. I don't know if it's been issued yet or not, but that's actually a lot of reports that you are going to be reading at a audit committee when you are already fairly busy. I don't have a ready solution to this. I merely point out that there's a lot of reports there. And one way that some organisations work around this is to circulate the reports, as far ahead of the audit committee as possible, as in batches at a time that's suitable, in order that people can make sure that they've read them ahead and can circulate questions. And that way the papers can be taken as read at the meeting. Otherwise, you could end up considering an awful lot of things at that July meeting.
Yeah, it looks like we're going to have quite a pile, don't we?
And one or two of those are potentially quite meaty reports as well.
We get pizzas. We'll get pizzas for July meeting.
It's up to you. I'm happy to talk through them in detail at the July Audit Committee, but you might not get much change out of midnight.
We can arrange for circulation of those reports in advance. I believe we can do that to give members more time to read them in advance of the July meeting.
Yes, please. I'll go light on the questions. Get through it.
I think we should be very cognizant of Philip's proposal.
Yeah.
And finally, the recommendations, as is typical towards the year end, the number of recommendations come up. But what I would say is we're about to do a sweep of the recommendations, as is usually the case at the year end. And I'm sure at that point in time, we'll see those recommendation numbers go well down. And that is because, as part of my Head of Internal Audit opinion, I do an update which includes the state of play of all outstanding recommendations, and I contrast that as against last year, do direction of travel statements, and they're also used as mitigatory support in respect of audit reports that have been perhaps limited or even reasonable assurance during the course of the year. So it's direction of travel stuff. So it's important that the recommendations reduce as far as possible, and because of that, I'm sure Fiona and I will be working together to make sure that the number of recommendations is reduced and that we've got an update in respect of all of them. I've got no particular concerns in respect to the number of recommendations here, merely to say that what you see presented here today is not going to be the state of play in 2 weeks' time.
Yeah, because I came up with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 questions. And I could...
Everyone's very busy at the year end.
Yeah.
Like in a practical sense, isn't prioritising old internal audit recommendation. It's not top of the list of things to do. I'd love to say it was, but it's not. But towards at the year end, when you've got the Head of Internal Audit opinion, and it's going to kind of inform the annual governance statement, that shifts up the priority list. So those recommendations will inevitably be updated. This is not an outlier organisation in that respect. It really is symptomatic generally of the state of play.
But we've seen examples in other authorities where they've not taken note of the recommendations from the internal audit process, with dire consequences. So we need to take the point about the organisation of them, but we do need to be very aware of them, make sure.
I mean, what I would say is there are no priority 1 recommendations here. And if there were recommendations that were keeping you awake at night, I would be alerting you. I would have alerted you to that at the previous audit committee, frankly. And the other thing I would say is you do have a system in place here, if it helps, where you've got limited assurance reports. We go in and do additional work to support that not just the recommendations have been actioned, but the root causes have been addressed. And indeed, one of the audits that you've got coming to the next audit committee is waste, which was a limited assurance report with a lot of recommendations. And those were contested recommendations as well. So we've gone in and done a substantial piece of work just re-examining that. And although it's not finalised yet, I believe, I mean, it's probably no secret to say that it was a very positive audit. So, yeah.
It's good to hear.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I can see from the 9 questions I've asked, 5 of them have been completed already, which is good. A couple have been, got dates revised, which is good. So I'm not going to trot through them all. I think it's just a note that I've asked a series of questions about.
Yeah, just to say that obviously in the Head of Internal Audit opinion, actually, so re-revised dates still gets stated there, because effectively a date was agreed to and it's moved along for whatever reason. So it would still be encompassed. So obviously the drive will be not to push the date to the future, but actually to resolve the recommendations.
But overall, you don't feel there's a...
I'm very comfortable in respect of this council. I was at an audit committee last night where I was extremely uncomfortable, and it turned into a very long audit committee. And this audit committee, it works in an appropriate manner. I'm happy with controls in place, and I believe it will be a fairly positive Head of Internal Audit opinion.
To be fair, I mean, I came up with 9 questions, so it's indicative, it's, you know, it reads sensibly, you know, the activities that people are working on. And I'm, you know, I'm getting answers which make sense. So it was good. Anybody else got any questions on the work?
The only comment I would make, it's not a question, but colleagues around the table previously will recall that I have expressed a level of concern that we've had internal audit reports, not from yourself, Philip, not from your company. And we've had, you know, we've been almost struggling to find the small minutiae things that are not necessarily, they're not category 1, priority 1, but they're priority 2 and 3, but they're the ones that can actually come back and bite you. So I think that your forensic interrogation of this is good, and I think it helps us across the piece.
It probably helps as well that I'm local, so.
Well, I mean, I know that.
I literally read all the documentation at the weekends. Generally interested in it.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's good work. Do we have to make a recommendation or?
The recommendations are on page 48. They are to note, but I think the minutes would be worth going through them.
Can we take the recommendations as read and agreed? So I'm going to go back to page 48.
I know, that's what I've just scrolled back up to, yeah. So are we happy to note the final internal audit reports issued for the 3 areas? Yes. And are we happy to note the content of the SICA and progress against the annual internal audit plan? Great. I only had a couple of other questions against the proposed future plan, or is that the next agenda item?
I mean, given it's been presented before, I don't propose talking through it in a lot of detail. So I know that everyone's will have read this because it's literally what we're proposing to do over the forthcoming year. Yeah. It's mostly an iteration of the 3-year plan. So if you recall, there are various columns there. There are a couple of changes that have been made, which again, I don't propose to talk through in detail because if you've got a concern in respect of any of the lines, now would be your opportunity to speak up. But what I would say is this document is not set in stone. The plan is mutable. We can change it during the course of the year as your risks change. You know, every council has got risks that develop throughout the course of the year, and indeed, earlier on we were talking about the fact that you need to consider your exposure to risk going forward, the appetites that you have in respect of risk, and that might well impact in respect of the topics that you consider that you want within the audit plan. In the event that you decided you wanted to scrap some of the other topics that were down in quarter 3 or 4, I would be very open to that. That's none of these topics are things that I have my heart out. So it's literally to allow us to start delivering the plan for next year. I think it's really important that we do that. And one thing that I would like is for this forthcoming year for us to try and position it so that the timeline is more stable. So where we say something's going to be delivered in quarter 1, that it is. Now, obviously, we've had a lot happen this last year, which resulted in some of those topics slipping towards quarter 4. But hopefully this year that would be less the case. And certainly my discussions with, sorry, I've lost the ability to speak. My discussion with Fiona earlier on indicated that she's supportive of that drive as well.
Just on that point, we've had full consultation with corporate leadership team colleagues, so heads of service, assistant directors, on both the plan and the timing of the audits as well. Things obviously can come up during the year, which may cause the need for some movement, but by and large, I would expect us to be trying to adhere to the timetable as much as we can.
When I did home in on the advisory reviews and the website penetration test, a little hobby horse of mine. And I did ask questions about when the last comprehensive set of penetration tests was completed.
So what I would say is that those are additional services, like consultancy services. I don't deliver that myself. It's merely kind of like selling type fluff that is in the, this has been recorded. It's not necessary for you to have, like frankly, during the course of what is an assurance plan. And there are many other providers that are able to provide you with those services. It's merely that we have the ability.
So I was content with the response I'd received. Testing had been performed in the previous year, and our recent certification, PCN, the network.
Yeah, I mean, on the back of recent things I have seen at some organisations, I think it's really important that, you keep on top of that kind of thing. Patches are applied, and you get assurance that that kind of thing is done. And ideally, you would get some form of that assurance directly or indirectly at this committee.
So we're content with the forward plan for next year? Everybody agree?
Yes.
Excellent.
There is another recommendation in respect of that item, which is actually the approval of the internal audit charter. So, Philip, please step in. I'll just give it very briefly. The charter really sets out internal audit's purpose, and we do require formal approval by this committee on an annual basis. So that is Appendix A to the internal audit.
So it is actually possible that may require to be redone in 3 months' time, actually. So so it is required to be done on an annual basis, but without boring you too much, some of the rules have just changed recently, and there's a bit of a internal audit market consultation going on exactly what that means. It's entirely possible that at some stage, either myself or someone from TIA may give you a presentation in respect of what that means to internal audit going forward.
More work for less fees?
It's unlikely to impact the front end of internal audit, but it will probably impact upon the head of internal audit opinion.
Okay, well, we'll look forward to that. Everybody are we all content with the internal audit charter? Yeah. That's good to me. Thank you very much. Thank you for being honest there, Fiona. Are we on to strategic, the last item, I believe?
I think there's 2 more items to go. We'll try and get through them in good time. The first one is the questions to audit committee from the external auditor.
Oh, I jumped over that one. 159, yes. Right. Page 159.
And I can take this item, Chair, if that's
yes,
all right.
Please.
So as part of the work that KPMG will do for the external audit, they're required to put a series of questions to audit committee, as the body charged with governance for the council. The purpose of this really is to meet the requirements of various international auditing standards. So they have to formally document that they've put these questions to yourselves and that they've received a response from you. For those who've been in the committee for a while, in previous years, these responses were often signed off by the chair of audit committee, but we're trying to bring them to you all now. So there's collective sign off of those responses before they go back to the auditor. So the questions and the proposed responses are set out at Appendix A. They all pertain to fraud. I won't go through them in detail, but they're asking questions like how you oversee fraud risk assessment and the establishment of controls. The main way in which that happens here is through the internal audit reports that are presented to you and the associated findings. There are also a series of questions about what your views on fraud risks at the entity are. We have a dedicated anti-fraud service within the council that sits within my remit, and anti-fraud activity goes on there. As and when there is anything to report through to committee, we would bring something through to you here. The other questions are around whether you are aware of any instances of fraud having been reported to you, and there's a nil response, a negative response on that one to say no, we're not aware of those. So that's a broad flavour of the kind of questions that are being posed there. So really the report is for you to kind of come back with any comments to me on, but ultimately I'm looking for approval on the proposed responses to go back to the auditor.
Can I just chip in briefly on this as well? So just to elaborate slightly, so I've had a conversation with both sets of auditors, external auditors, about my views in respect of fraud. I believe that this organisation has a similar exposure to fraud of many other councils, slightly less than some of the more parlous ones that you may have read about. But essentially, the risk type of fraud risk that you're exposed to are the same as others, procurement and so on and so forth. Our internal audit service, we are specifically not allowed to do design our audits to look for fraud. That is actually completely forbidden in internal audit. In the old days, you could conduct an audit where you would kind of almost design it to look for fraud. That's now considered to be a poor use of audit resources, and that would be the responsibility of the fraud colleagues that Fiona was alluding to earlier on. I think the only other thing that I would add is my consideration earlier on that I elaborated on to external audit is I haven't seen any example during the course of the previous 12 months of management override of controls that would make the organisation more likely to be exposed to fraud. The only other thing I would add actually is that typically organisations through their audit committees would do a self-assessment at the year end, and I don't know that I've seen that completed in this organisation in my time here, but that would be something that would be included in that self-assessment.
Sorry, is that a self-assessment of the membership of
the effectiveness of the audit committee?
Yes.
Yeah, no, it's a good recommendation, but I think at the moment, I've read through this and it made sense to me, and I responded in the affirmative. I was happy with the contents of it.
Just one question, have all the members completed their related party transactions returns?
On this committee?
No, across the council.
Across the board, we've had the majority of responses back through yet, which is given, where are we, the 20th of March? That's generally better, Councillor Duras, than we normally have performed at this point. We haven't had all of them through yet, though. We've had yours.
You're a Roger man to fill it in.
There's not many outstanding. I don't think it's more than 5 that are outstanding. And there's nothing that's come through on those in terms of related parties to the authority that have any concerns.
Did you do yours, Sadie?
We can get you a copy, don't worry. It's a form you have to complete for our year end.
I might not.
Have you got external interests that decorum? It's a form.
I have done.
You've done that form, yeah. It was handed out at the previous council meeting. But you did.
Yeah.
Well, what we just following on from your question, if it provides members with comfort, once we've had all of those in, we can notify. I'll have to check what we can disclose, but we can share any information that may be pertinent to all the committees.
Oh, I don't want to know who or it's just one of those little things that you're always anxious, if you like, because suddenly somebody who hasn't filled it in will pop up and you'll discover that they've got some interest somewhere, especially if it's not going right. And it's just one of those, and it's the reputational risk rather than the financial risk.
So we do additional checks within reason, not in violation of anyone's privacy, but on publicly available information, just to ensure that we've captured anyone, not someone who's deliberately filled in a form incorrectly, but perhaps didn't think to include something. So we do additional checks on that point, because we do have to make certain disclosures in our published accounts, as I know you're aware.
Sure.
So if we can take that as an action, Trudy, to see a summary, obviously anonymised. Redacted, anonymised, just to know that it's squeaky clean.
From my perspective, I'm not concerned about seeing a summary. It's just the reassurance that you're alert to it.
Or you're comfortable. Yeah. So are we happy to sign this off? I mean, as chair, I've read it. I'm happy with it.
Yeah,
put my name to it. Yep. Marvellous, thank you. And then the last item, the strategic risk register. I'll favour it. Q3.
So I'll take this one, Chair.
Thank
Thank you. So this is the quarter three update for the strategic risk register. It takes the usual format in terms of the appendix to the report, showing you an update from our strategic leadership team on the council's key strategic risks and actions that have been taken, and the status in terms of risk scoring of those relevant strategic risks. In terms of the movement from the position at Q2, there is just one, which is around the potential for weakening of the council's financial resilience. So at Q3, we've reduced the overall score for this to a 4. Previously, it had a score of 6, and this reflects the progress that we've made in terms of setting a balanced budget for 24-25. That is the rationale for the reduction in the perceived risk around that particular risk area. So happy to take any questions on the report. I would also comment, we've obviously had a number of recommendations in the area of risk reporting from the internal audit review that's done. I'm expecting to incorporate those into the Q4 reporting process. So this report may look a little different when it comes through to you in July.
Do you have any questions on this report? Any typos, Councillor Jones?
Don't encourage them, please.
It's good to know, to have an eagle eye in the team. I only had one question, which was around when with the internal and external auditors' recommendations find their way into this report. And I believe Q4, which is what Fiona's just said, we're all going to see a go faster version of this, which is marvellous. Right. We're making good time. I was scaring everybody earlier. We're going to be here till midnight.
So that's the next meeting.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, July is going to be pizzas. Scroll back, right back up to the top. Work programme. Any comments on the work programme? Pages 184 to 185. Is there any other business? Right, well, draw the meeting to a close. So 45 minutes of your life back.